So hello everyone, I am Hannah,
Hello, my name is Jenna.
and today we have Adenike.
Hi, I guess my proper title is Dr. Adenike Webb, board certified music therapist and assistant clinical professor at Drexel University.
That's very exciting. We can just start from the beginning and asking, how did you find out about music therapy and what was kind of your process of applying to colleges?
Okay. Well, I guess it's a little bit of an interesting story. So, if you haven't noticed the accent, I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, but I finished high school in Jamaica. And it was during my last year of high school that I was trying to figure out what exactly do I want to do? Where can I put my energy and my talents? And I remember very self-importantly telling my mother one day, like, don't disturb me. I'm taking the day to reflect and meditate on what I'm going to do. And what ended up coming out of that time of reflection was, I can use my music to help people. I've been playing piano since I was 5, and I was, piano lessons. In the Caribbean, we don't have quite an integrated a music program as they do in the States, for example. So all my music training happened outside of school. So everything was like extracurricular that I had to take initiative to do. But I loved it. I used to play in church whenever I could, whenever they needed me. You know, and at school, I ended up playing for like any kind of assemblies that we had. I played for our graduation. Like they needed somebody to play the song that one of our classmates wrote. So it's like I could use this to help people. And a friend of my mother's had sent over, just like a few months before my meditation day, had sent over a list of professions in music outside of teaching and performing. Because at that time, all I thought was if I wanted to do music, I'd either have to go away and study performance or stay and do teaching. Or if I go away and do performance, I still have to come back and do teaching because there's not really much of a performance circuit, so to speak. So I only thought I had two options. So I remembered he had sent this list. So I looked at it. A music therapist was on there. Now I had no clue what that was, never heard of it. But something kind of resonated with me, like it was a gut feeling. So I'm like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm supposed to do. And bless my mother, she never questioned it. She'd never heard of music therapy either. And she's like, all right, fine, let's find out about it. And this was like before the time of Google. So I don't even remember how we came across what was then the National Association for Music Therapy in the US. I guess my options would have been either go to the US or go to the UK, and the US was just closer. So somehow we contacted the NAMT and got a list of schools, and we settled on a school in Virginia because I had family in Virginia. But what ended up happening was that was my last year of high school, and I wanted to take a year off and then apply to do music therapy. But my mother didn't trust my motives, I guess. So she was like, the next school that offers you any kind of money, you're going. So this school in West Virginia offered me and my sister a scholarship. So we ended up going there, and I knew I was just going to be there a year because I wanted to transfer to Radford University in Virginia to do music therapy, which I did. So it was kind of a intuitive process, maybe how I came to settle on music therapy and select a school. Like I don't even recall one lie, actually. Not a lie. It's not, I just realized I did consider another school. I think I looked at Temple for
Ah,
undergraduate school. I did. And I remember talking to my aunt who lives in Virginia, like, oh, maybe I could apply to Temple. She's like, no, you don't want to go to Philadelphia. Temple's in the ghetto. You don't want to go there. And then lo and behold, however many years later, I ended up at Temple to do my master's and my PhD. So
yeah, that's wild, actually.
it is. I just like I kind of forgot that happened. I had thought about it like a long time ago. Like, wait a minute, I did consider Temple just briefly. And then look how I ended up here. And that was another gut feeling because after I finished my bachelor's in music therapy, did my internship, I got noticed that there was a job offering in a geropsych hospital in Virginia because the person who was there was leaving to go to Radford to do her master's. So she had told the professor, oh, we have an opening. So here I go, apply. And it was, basically working with adults 65 and over who all had some sort of psychiatric, mental health, or behavioral health need. And I really enjoyed it. I worked primarily with people on the dementia and Alzheimer's unit, but I did work with some who were medically frail and so on. But I remember having an experience once where I picked a song in preparation for group, thinking, oh, this is a great song. Everybody loves it. It's going to be wonderful. And I get in there, play the song, and one of the group participants just bursts into tears, sobbing uncontrollably. And I was shocked. I was like, but this is a happy song. Why is she crying? What's going on? And it occurred to me that there's a lot of power with music. And if I'm going to be in this field and do things, I have to be responsible. So that was one of the first things that pushed me to go back and get my master's. I wanted to really be as knowledgeable as I could and as careful as I could in what I was using music to do. And I had a choice. I could have gone back to Radford because they had a master's program, and it would have been a definite get in type thing because, I went there, they know me, all that stuff. But I looked at that time, Google and the internet did exist. So I looked at Temple's website, and again, it was one of these gut feelings like, this is where I'm supposed to be. So I applied, had the interview, and I remember thinking I bombed the interview. I remember thinking, because it was Dr. Brooks, Dr. Dillio, and Dr. Brusha.
Ooh.
And Dr. Brusha asked all these questions that made me think, well, I don't know what I'm doing. Why am I even applying? And I remember I had stayed at a hotel in Center City, like on Chestnut Street. And I walked from campus back to my hotel. I don't know why I did it. I just kept walking. Like now I would never dare to do that. But I'm like, okay, let me just think about this interview. All right. So maybe I sucked at it, but you know what? It's preparing me for other interviews. And then when I went back home to Virginia, and I sent a thank you email, and the next day, like, okay, great, you're really in. So I was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, that's kind of my journey with education and music therapy in a way.
What kind of made you decide? I'm assuming that the master's was kind of what made you, or that experience was what made you go for the master's. But in terms of your PhD, like what was kind of your reasoning or thought process or interest, I guess, in going for that?
So there are a couple of reasons. One big one was in my work as a music therapist, especially having students, I recognized that we didn't pay a lot of attention to cultural influences and cultural, like the role of culture in the work that we do. A lot of students would come in. I worked primarily with Black and Brown clients. A lot of my students coming in were white, and I'd have people come in, I mean, well-meaning, really sweet, kind people, but they had little sense of like, okay, well, this type of interaction is kind of typical among people in African American culture, but to them it was kind of like, oh, this is not. A lot of them weren't really familiar with like hip hop music and stuff, so there's just a lot of learning because in our training at the time, we didn't really include a lot of gospel music, Motown music, hip hop music, rap music. The reggae, that if you were to incorporate music from like where I'm from, the only reggae song they ever did was Three Little Birds, which I love Bob Marley, but I cannot hear Three Little Birds anymore. Like there's so much more to Bob. If you just want to stick with Bob, there's so much more Bob you could go with. But anyways, so I just felt like there was a lack of knowledge or even interest about what role is culture playing in our interactions. So I felt like, well, and then part of it too, I had some colleagues who were also looking at this question that I would do presentations with at AMTA conferences, the American Music Therapy Association conferences. So we talked about our journey with culture. We talked about working with students of different cultures. So I think I'd done maybe 3 or 4 presentations with them. And just like, this was just a thing that was really occurring to me. Secondly, I had this desire to go back to the Caribbean. When I left the Caribbean, there was nobody else I knew as a music therapist. There were no training programs. And I've lived in Trinidad and I've lived in Jamaica. Music is a huge part of the culture in both places. They're very similar, but they are distinct. And I figured, it's got to carry through into other Caribbean islands, and there would be other people who would love to find ways of incorporating music into well-being. So wouldn't it be great if we had a program in the Caribbean? But knowing how people are in the Caribbean, I couldn't go back with just a bachelor's in something nobody had ever heard of.
Mm.
So I figured the more education I had, plus any opportunity to do research and teaching, would really shore me up to do well if I went back there. So those are the two big reasons. And then the third is a vanity reason. But it's something, kind of cool. So my mother was a doctor and my sister is a doctor. And I'm thinking I can't be the only one in the family who doesn't have doctor in front of her name. So I have to go and get this PhD so I could be part of the club. So that was a lesser reason to get it. But and those were some of the things that really pushed me to go back and get my PhD, to like really, really look at how can we shape education and training to incorporate a broader, more inclusive, more culturally sustaining approach to the work that we do. So
Yeah, that's awesome. So do you feel like that's still your goal, to go back?
Well, I ended up meeting my husband.
Right.
So that kind of changed plans a little bit. And there are more music therapists in Trinidad now. For example, I think they're about 4 or 5 actually. And I'm in touch with them because there is a Music Therapy Association of Trinidad and Tobago. It's not very active. I mean, the people are working and doing things, but as an association, they're small, so they don't often have a lot of time to do many big events. But they are in touch with other arts therapists in Trinidad and in the Caribbean. And I guess I just kind of give support however I can. Like they've done like there's a creative arts therapy week that they had in Trinidad back in March maybe or something. So like I'm part of their Facebook group. So they were like, oh, we want to do this particular event. So I was able to join virtually or send a video, I think it was. So I feel like keeping contact with them sort of helps because I can support the initiatives, I can give input in some way. I don't know if they and the country's ready for a music therapy program. I think there's interest. I think it could happen. I don't know if I would get to be the one to help make it happen. I don't know, but it's kind of funny. I just stay open to whatever opportunities sort of arise, and we'll see what happens though.
Yeah. When you were kind of picking the different schooling programs, what did you really like about each of them, and what was something that if you could go back you would change
Huh.
or would like to see grow?
Well, I mean, when I first picked Radford, it was more out of convenience in the sense that, oh, well, we have family in Virginia. So if anything, I would have a little bit of support coming from abroad. But once I got to Radford, I really liked a couple of things. Well, the professor who I had there is no longer there. He's retired, Mr. Jim Borling. I really admired the way he ran the program. He never specifically said like, you had to embrace this particular orientation or approach to music therapy. He told us that there were different approaches. And if I had to pick one, I'd probably say the school was client-centered in its approach. But we were free to kind of explore, I mean, within the parameters of like what we needed to know for the CBMT exam and stuff like that. We were free to make our own understandings of where we wanted to be as music therapists. And I liked that. One thing that was interesting at the time, which may have been because there were so few music therapists in the area, we tended to go out to clinical experiences in pairs because there were so few music therapists in the area. So my very first music therapy clinical site was at an after-school program just a few blocks from campus. And I went with another student who was also her first time. We were both juniors, I think. And we had to do a music therapy group for the semester. It's like, I mean, we had supervision on campus, of course, where you'd go back in and talk about what was going on. I mean, and then there was like a person on site who would be a point of contact. But they weren't a music therapist. So they could have been the activity director or social worker or something. And we just had to jump in. And as terrifying as that was, it was good learning experiences because I learned real quick, don't ask 20 children how you're feeling. And if they say bad, oh, why are you bad? What's wrong? Because you will end up taking 30 minutes of your 40 or 50-minute session asking 20 children, what's wrong? What's wrong? So we learned like, this is how you do a check-in. This is how you, this is when you dive deeper. This is when you might kind of sit back, you know? And in other clinical experiences, yes, I had a partner. Like one time I was paired with someone who was a senior, another time somebody again in my level. And then a couple of times I did get to observe music therapists themselves. So I saw somebody in the school system in Christiansburg, Virginia. And then I saw someone who was at a psychiatric hospital in Salem, Virginia. So I had a nice mix of experiences. And what I took from that was it really helps to learn by doing. So when I became a clinician and I had students come to see me, I started this thing where like you get 2 freebies. So the first 2 visits, you just strictly observe. You're just part of the group taking it all in. The third time you come, you're doing something. So you're doing the hello song, you're doing the closing song, or you're doing some smaller like warm-up experience. And gradually you become more and more involved because you could sit and watch me for 6 months. And if you never try it, never get into it, there might be this intimidation or lack of connection of elements. So I really appreciated the practical aspects of learning that I got at Radford. And at Temple, I liked that they had, which they still do, they have these 2 tracks, like a music medicine track and a music psychotherapy track. And the music psychotherapy track is what appeals to me, looking at how we can engage music and understanding what's happening internally with someone. I would say Temple was probably, or is, I don't know, I should know this better. I was going to say they're probably very psychodynamic, but not as psychodynamic as other schools, maybe. Because I feel like there was still room to be, be like humanistic in my thinking and so on. So that was another thing I appreciated. But the 2 schools I attended, yes, they had an orientation, but I wasn't like forced to adhere to it. Like whatever worked for me and the clients I found myself with, go for it, you know? I think both schools encouraged independent thinking based on solid music therapy theory. And they encouraged, practical learning and creativity in expression of how you learn. So I really valued that.
Can you talk a little bit about your internship experience, how that was applying? Where did you select to go? What did you learn during your internship?
Okay, internship. So I was in denial about finishing my program because I was having way too good a time with my friends in college. And, if I applied for internship, that meant, oh, all this is coming to an end. So Radford belonged to was part of the National Association of Music Therapy Schools. AMTA didn't come into existence until 1998. So that was like in the middle of my training. And we did, become part of AMTA, but we were on the national roster system for internships, whereas Temple was on the university affiliated, where they would get internships for their students. So I had to go onto the AMTA site, and look up internship sites that I would be interested in applying in. And I applied to 2. I think one was in New York and I can't remember. I think it might have been like a setting for people with developmental disabilities. But the other one I applied to was in Columbus, Ohio. It was Twin Valley Behavioral Health Care, so mental health. And that was the only one I interviewed at. And that's where I ended up going. So what was interesting was the internship was spread. Twin Valley Behavioral Healthcare has two internship spots, one at their civil hospital and one at their forensic hospital. They're both on the same campus. One is just down the hill from the other. And because of the timing of when I applied and when I would come in, I ended up getting the spot at the forensic psych hospital, which was very interesting. And to go back to the whole thing about denial, I had been in school at this point going on 6 years. I transferred from that school in West Virginia to Radford. And then I had to wait 6 months to do my internship because of when the timing would be. So I'm like, I'm just ready to be done. I'm not even sure I want to do this music therapy thing anymore. I'm just tired of school. I'll do this stupid internship and then I'll figure something else out. And I loved it. Fell in love with it. And I fell in love with psych. Like every job I've had as a music therapist has been based in the mental health, behavioral health field since then. My first experiences at the forensic psych hospital were a little bit intimidating in some ways because, like, you know, these are people who have been either found not guilty by reason of insanity or are there to be evaluated for their competency to stand trial. So all of these people at some point had a charge, and some of them serious charges. Like there were people there who had murdered people, you know? And, you know, you can't just like waltz into the hospital. You got to check everything. You can't carry these kinds of things. We couldn't have a group or even an individual session without a corrections officer right outside. So if they were understaffed and corrections officers couldn't be in the treatment plaza, you can have your groups, you know? So that element was a little like, oh my gosh, but it was a really great experience. For one, I was given a lot of autonomy. So my supervisor sort of treated me more like a new entry-level colleague than a student. So, I mean, yes, they gave me correction and guidance with things, but it was more like, hey, whatever you want to do, if you have a valid reason to do it, go right ahead. We'll see how it goes, you know? So I was able to like start, one of the groups that I started was a choir. So the hospital had like a multicultural concert that they would do every spring or something. So one of the groups I did was a choir. So we'll have a choir perform in that. The way they did treatment was they had like modules. So there would be like call it an 8-week module where, okay, for these 8 weeks, these are the groups that the patients will go to. And then the next 8 weeks, we reassign them to different groups. So I was able to introduce the choir in one module. I got to do some individual sessions and do things I didn't think I'd do. For example, there was one patient who wanted to learn how to drum, and there was a drum set, and that was our one-on-one sessions. And I chuckled at that because I'm not a percussionist, but I did have to take a percussion class at Radford. That was at 8:00 in the morning, and I don't do well with morning stuff. And I was like, I can't believe I actually had to use what I learned at an 8:00 a.m., you know, percussion class in my internship. But hey, here it goes. So I got to really see what it was like to be in that behavioral health environment. I began to learn, I mean, and I'm still learning. It was a bit of a process, but I began to really learn a lot about race and the interactions race can have. Because there were, you know, a lot of people who were Black and brown there. And I remember having an interaction with a client, which they accused me of talking more to the white people than the Black people, which wasn't true. It was kind of like their way of trying to get at me because he was a young guy who was trying to hit on me and I wouldn't respond to him that way. So, but it did raise questions about like, well, what does it mean to be Black in this environment? And what does it mean to engage with white people in this environment or to engage with Black people in this environment? So those sorts of things began to kind of get on my radar. I won't say that I was very attuned to them, but so I began to, you know, just notice some things as I was going on. And I I had a great experience. By the end of the 6 months I was there, I was convinced I'm supposed to be in music therapy and probably in psych. So
From where
That's
you
awesome.
started, it sounds like that's a pretty big transition.
I know. It turned out to be really, really neat because I think and it's something I've seen throughout my career, like authenticity and a genuine appreciation of the other person goes a long way. And I think I was able to be myself in that environment and share things like whether it was my music or aspects of my culture or whatever, and people appreciated it and they were able to do the same with me. And I felt like I love being able to share music with people. And every place I've worked, my understanding of music therapy has expanded. And I now see myself not as someone who comes in to run a session or dictate what will happen in a session. I just bring this opportunity with me. We get together. I happen to have knowledge of music and of some aspects of experiences we can do with music. You have this knowledge about yourself and what you need and what you do. I open this box. You get to go inside it and figure out how do we put the things together to make it work for you. The best sessions I've had were ones where it didn't go according to plan. I just walked in there. And again, this is not like anybody can just walk in there. Like, and I got to this point because I did learn a lot about theory. I did practice what's it like to improvise, what's it like to write a song, what's it like to recreate a piece of music. So I did have to build these musical skills, but and these music therapy skills. But I learned that my role isn't to make anything happen. The best things happen when we share, when we co-create with the people coming to our groups. And the most I can hope is, especially working in like an inpatient psych setting where there's a lot of turnover. I never knew if I was going to see the same person more than once. The most I can hope for is that this was a meaningful experience for them. What can I offer that they can find something to take away, So yeah, I love it. I love sharing music with people. And I'm not doing clinical work as much now because I'm more in the education and sort of administrative aspects of it. But I enjoy talking with students about their experiences and seeing where they are. And I think I'll end up again doing some clinical work. I don't know when and how that will fit into the schedule, but I don't count it out at all.
Yeah. It sounds like both hold somewhat meaningful things in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sort of taking that into account after internship with the CBMT exam, what was kind of your experience taking the exam and preparing for it? What did you find helpful for you? And now, like as an educator, what do you find helpful when helping other students prepare for the exam?
Okay, so in the spirit of transparency, I took the exam like 20 years ago.
Yes. Yeah.
This has been a while, but when I took the exam, I did like follow what the CBMT website recommended in terms of preparation. So I remember like looking at some of the practice questions that they had, like going through that, reviewing some of the notes that I had. I mean, it's kind of hard to like review everything you studied over a 4-year period, but I think what helped me was thinking about because at that point when I took the exam, I had already started working, and I had my place of work was saying, as long as you get it get your MTBC within the first year, that's great. So 6 months into working there, I did the exam. And building on using that experience and what I got from my internship, thinking about, well, what are the kinds of skills that I'm using? So like what are the kinds of interactions and conversations I have with colleagues about the people I'm working with? Like how do, because sometimes that shows up as a scenario question on the CBMT, like the way you refer or the way you discuss a case with someone. What sorts of skills am I using in my group? I do a lot of transposition, musical, when we're talking about musical skills. So like okay, I start playing in this key, but obviously they can't sing this high with me. So we got to drop it down. Um, so thinking about what are the music skills that I tend to use a lot. Thinking about what, it's hard to know everything about every population, but I just kind of thinking about sort of like the ethics in how you approach working with someone. Like, what do you take into consideration? Like, do you get information from the client? How do you get information from the client or from their caregivers or their parents or whoever? And like thinking about the way I learn about someone. So just thinking about the way I do things helped in preparation. Now, what I would say for students, in addition to that, especially if you're taking it right out of internship, like you're really fresh because you've just done all these things. You have just finished your coursework, all these things. In addition, there are groups where people get together to do prep. For example, I know in the Black Music Therapy Network, there on our Facebook page, there's often someone who would post maybe once a month or once every other month, hey, we're getting ready to do CBMT prep. This is when we'll do it. So there'll be groups of people that come together to do it. If you can get your hands on practice questions, that's some of the best ways to get yourself ready for it. Because you can take a guess at which textbook should I pick up from my college and read through again. And that's not necessarily going to be useful, but definitely looking at practice questions, because you'll see the way that the exam is structured, and it kind of helps you think about how to approach the questions, because sometimes it's not a glaringly wrong answer. Like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely not A, it's not B, it's not D, it has to be C. It's not that always that easy. Sometimes it's like, well, maybe it could be A, but it could also be D. And you have to think about what would be the ethics of choosing D because it's usually in a situation when they're asking you, how would you do something with a client or with a colleague? So what would be the ethics involved in doing D versus A? What would be the impact on the client if it's that, if I did option A versus option D? So it's looking at practice questions could really help you see how they're structuring things and how the examiners want you to think about approaching things.
That's a good way to put it. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say it like that before.
Oh, okay.
In terms of the ethics, of like the impact on the client itself.
Yeah. Because sometimes there'll be something like, and I'm trying to think of a question, like, Susie has anxiety and has been referred to music therapy. Which of the following might be an appropriate music therapy experience to do with Susie? One might be write a song about what makes her anxious. Do guided imagery and music, or 3, do an improvisation about anxiety. Are any of those wrong? No, because there could be some point in time where you do that. But if this is your first session with Susie and it's stated like this is Susie's first session, there might be one particular approach that is more helpful in the first session, or rather than something else, so it's just a matter of what is the most appropriate, what type of impact would it have on the client. So for some folks, for example, and this is not a good question, this is just something off the top of my head, but for example, if I would have just jumped right into like, let's go improvise about feeling anxious in somebody's first session, depending on who they are and what's going on, that just might not be the way to go. Let's write a song about anxiety. Might not work in your first session. Maybe it might be a good place to do something more receptive, where we just start off breathing and doing imagery. And as we get to know each other and as you get to build up your resources, then we can probably dive into improvisation around this topic, or then we can get into songwriting. So nothing was wrong with those options, but for the first session, they might not be the best choice, So those are the kinds of questions I think kind of pop up on the CBMT exam.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about continuing education, what you found the most valuable for you? Was it going back and taking college classes again? Is it attending conferences? and kind of different things that you've done in the past, whether that be directly related to the field of music therapy or if it's something a little adjacent to that.
All of the above. I found. I love. I still do. I love going to conferences. Excuse me. Sometimes it's a bit of a financial thing, how often one can go and what one can do there. But I've always enjoyed going to conferences. One, for the networking, you know, two, just connect with folks. And three, of course, you know, yes, you get your continuing music therapy education credits for attending. And then if you are doing a track, like you say you go to all sessions that deal with pediatric medical needs, and you get the presenter to sign off on your program, then you can, I think you have to do a little write-up for CBMT to show that you did this particular track as a way of furthering your education in this area. But I mean, I like being able to have opportunity to see and learn different things from people. I like going to workshops, and I love facilitating them. You get credits for facilitating workshops as well and presenting. So I think, you know, because you have to look at, excuse me, you have to look at what is out there, what is currently the state of the field or the research, and how are you presenting what's out there in addition to what you do to help further the practice of your colleagues. So you are learning as you help them learn, you know, and that's a great thing. So I love presenting at conferences or doing CMTE workshops with other folks. I just love learning. So that's why I went back to school too. I just love being in that environment. That's why I now teach. I love being in that environment. I think it's always important. I think we have to keep growing. It's, if we stay stagnant, we become complacent, and then we can't be as responsive to what's showing up in our sites, in our work, with the students we work with. People change, people grow, and yes, there are cycles, and yes, you will see patterns and stuff like that, but it's still going to be different and still requires a unique kind of responsiveness. So you have to keep learning. You have to keep developing your skills, whether it's developing your music skills or learning about a particular way of doing trauma-informed care, or learning about being more culturally sustaining and culturally aware in what you're doing. Like always keep learning.
Yeah. In terms of supervision, kind of going into the education route too, as a clinician and an educator, I guess, what supervision style works best for you in terms of receiving supervision that you follow? And as a therapist giving supervision to students and potentially to other professionals, do you feel like it's changed throughout your career? What have you found works for you as a supervisor?
Let's see. I think I have changed as a supervisor. I have changed my style throughout the years. I think when I first started supervising students, I felt like I had to give them everything. Like I had to tell you all the information, get you and now it's like, maybe not so much. You know, I realized it has to be more of a conversation, more of a give and take. I offer perspective, and that's how I appreciate the supervision I've received. It took me a while to get supervision that I really felt was meaningful. I was, when I first started working as a music therapist, I was the only one there. And yes, there was an offer of supervision from a music therapist who wasn't affiliated with the site, but I didn't, it would seem like it was too much of a hassle to coordinate that. So I didn't take advantage of that offer. I did peer supervision with colleagues as I, you know, continued my career, and that was nice, but it wasn't always regular, you know. And then eventually I was able to do some individual supervision with a therapist. And I was kind of hesitant at first because I thought, well, supervision, they're going to tell me what I'm doing wrong and nitpick all these things. But it's not that. To me, it was about perspective. So if I'm working with someone, I'm going to see it from one lens. And it could be because of biases, it could be because of patterns of behaviors and interactions or whatever else, and I'm only going to see it this way. But when I tell somebody else what's going on, they might see it from this way. Mm-hmm. And that might shift. When I hear that, that might kind of get me out of a rut I might have been in. They're like, oh, let me take that information into consideration. So I try now with students and with any other music therapists that might work with for supervision to just give perspective, you know, ask questions. And I like to think also that people are building on their strengths, you know, like, yes, there are always things we can improve, but recognize the things you are doing well. And how can you help that move into areas that you need to improve? So that's kind of been my approach to supervision. Yeah.
I would agree with you.
That's right. I had you as my supervisee. So good. I'm glad you agree. I'm not telling an untruth. So.
No, I don't think so at all. I know you've talked a little bit about the different jobs you've had, but in terms of job searching, what advice do you have regarding job searching, potentially for initial jobs, but also as professionals go throughout potentially different kinds of jobs in the therapy profession? And when you have sort of jumped around between jobs, what are things that drew you in and that you were looking for?
So tips for job searching. I know I have often been kind of laser focused, like the job has to specifically say music therapist wanted. And sometimes you do find those jobs that are very clear, this position is music therapy. But I've learned you can get in through the door as something else and do music therapy there. So it might be that they're looking for some kind of, like, especially like if it's an assisted living or nursing home setting, they might be looking for some kind of activities director, you know, or if you're looking at maybe somewhere with addictions, people people in recovery or mental health, they might be looking for some kind of counselor or mental health. You know, you have to look at the requirement. If they're asking for an LPC and you don't have your LPC, you shouldn't be applying for that. But, you know, there might be some kind of way that they're phrasing it, where some kind of support worker or support that, whatever it might be, that when you read it, it's like, well, music therapy could actually apply in here, you know? So I would encourage people to kind of broaden their search a little bit. Stay within your scope, you know, don't apply for a job where you know you don't have the credentials they're looking for, but certainly apply for jobs where, you know, you certainly have the skills they're looking for, even if they're not calling it music therapy. So that's something I've learned, and I've been encouraged by people in my life to do that. The jobs that have appealed to me, I think, was that part of the question that you asked? I think ones where I knew I would get to really be part of a team, because I know I work best collaboratively. I mean, I can do good things on my own, but I love being able to talk through things with other people, get energy from other people to address a situation. So if I know that I'm not going to be the only music therapist or the only creative arts therapist or whoever, like I'm going to be part of a well-defined integrated team, that sounds cool to me. I'm ready to go take a look at that. What else appeals to me about a job? I guess, and some of this you won't find out till you get into the interview, but kind of looking at their like philosophy, their approach, like the way they engage with people. So, I mean, you can sense things from the way the person who's interviewing you talks to you, but like when you're walking through the hall, if they're giving you a tour, how are they talking to the receptionist? How are they talking to this other therapist who walks by quickly? Or if you run into people who receive services from that side, how are they talking to them? How are other people talking to them? Like, what seems to be the vibe, the approach? Like, I like to sense, I guess it's kind of intuitively, like, what is the vibe here? Does it feel like people want to be here? Not that everything's going to be perfect. You can want to be somewhere and there's still little kinks to iron out, but because people want to be there, it's going to be a productive a productive experience trying to iron out those kinks, you know. But if it feels like people have to be here and, you know, they're just trying to get this paycheck, like, you got to think if that's the kind of energy and vibe that you want. So to me, it matters that people want to be there, that people care about each other. You don't necessarily have to be best buds, but, you know, like there's this vibe that suggests all are welcome, all are valued. Like that matters to me when I look for a job. And of course, people can say stuff like that in their job description, but you really kind of have to get in the space and see, like, is that it? So with all that to say, like sometimes you can be offered a job and you might really need it, but if you're sensing something is kind of off, you know, whether it's like, it doesn't seem like they really value the creative arts therapies, or it doesn't seem like they really value the people that they're serving, you know, you might want to say, you know, say like, maybe this is not the vibe for me. I'm a firm believer that people will end up in the jobs and spaces they need to end up in. So, you know, I would say if you are an intuitive person, trust your gut when it comes to the vibes when you feel around in a certain space. So, yeah.
I like that.
So would you be able to talk a little bit about, as an educator, as a professional, where do you think that our profession is growing? Where would you like to see this continue to build as continue on in time? And where do you think we might be growing currently?
Interesting. So there's a lot of good stuff happening. I feel like it's more and more common for people I meet to say, oh, I know what music therapy is. Like 20 years ago, that was not the case. So I feel like we're getting more awareness because of things like, for example, even though it's not music therapy, I think it was Alive Inside, was that music movie about using music with people who had dementia. But, you know, it's an entry point for people to start talking about how do you use music, or how can music support well-being. So I feel like there's been a lot more interest in what are other ways to support well-being besides pharmacology, besides medicine and stuff like that. We are growing when it comes to aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We still have a lot of work to do there in our professional organization and as a profession. When you look at the AMTA, what do they call it? The workforce survey that they send out every year. There's a demographic sort of pie chart where they look at what are the racial backgrounds of people who are responding to the survey, and then what are the gender identities of people who are responding to the survey. And when you look at just that, we're something like 87% white and 80-something% female. Now, nothing wrong to be white and female, but when you think about what is the percentage in the general population of the United States, for example, then this is vastly skewed. And what ends up happening is, you know, not out of ill intent, but people do what they know and people gravitate to who and what they know. So if all we have are a lot of white women running music therapy programs and being music therapists, we're going to continue to see a lot of white women coming in and doing that, because it's easy to look for people like yourself. You make assumptions about what they know and what they do. And then when it comes to music, yes, you might talk about we need to diversify our repertoire and so on. But if all you know is this because of your culture and where you grew up and what your surroundings are, how can you talk about rap and hip hop? How can you talk about, you know, salsa and merengue if you've not exposed yourself to it in a very intentional way? So I feel like we have some work to do with diversifying our profession, because representation matters. There's a lot that says, you know, when people see themselves in a position, when people see people like themselves in a position, they'd be like, well, I can be there too. I can do that too. And I think about it for our clients. You know, a lot of us are working with clients who are racially different, ethnically different, from a different socioeconomic background, may speak a different language, might have a different citizenship status, so many different things. So, if we can have more music therapists that reflect the people that they're working with, we get more knowledge, we get more experience, we get more music, we get so much more. So I think that's a place that we're growing in. I know there's a lot of, especially with the current generation of folks coming into music therapy, just given what's been happening in our society, people are more aware of these things and they want to see these things in our training. Like, how can we be more inclusive? And talking about, for example, aspects of disability justice when it comes to music therapy, not just talking about gender identity and race and sexual orientation. It's a big conversation. How ableist are we as music therapists? How are we talking about disability? How are we framing our work when we engage with people in the disabled community? Are we trying to fix what's broken, or are we, so there's so many different things that we're really coming to terms with now, and it's good. It's uncomfortable for some people in some ways, and that's okay, because that's part of the growing pains, right? We have to lean into that. I have a colleague, Dr. Natasha Thomas. She and I have a podcast called Black Creative Healing. And we've been talking a lot recently about leaning into dissonance. One of our colleagues in South Africa, in Munga, he was talking with us about how many times we tend to conflate safety and comfort. So people talk about, well, I don't feel safe in this environment, when a lot of times is they're not comfortable in the environment, and it's okay to be uncomfortable, because that's going to happen in community. We are going to disagree about something, but we can't run from it. If we keep running from it and avoiding it, or avoiding these conversations, we never learn how to grow, how to navigate, how to problem solve together. So yes, it's awkward and uncomfortable to talk about whether we're ableist, whether we're sexist, whether we're whatever it is, but it's necessary, So learning to lean into the dissonance as a community, I think that's where we're trying to grow right now as a profession. And I'm encouraged by the students I see, because like I said, they want to do this work. They see the value of being advocates for healing, and I feel like that's what we are as music therapists, advocates for healing. And we have to be authentic about what's going on. We have to be honest about what's going on, and we have to be willing to do the work. We can't be asking people to do work we're not trying to do ourselves. So that's what I kind of think.
Yeah, definitely. And I also would say, if there's anything, I know you mentioned your podcast and various networks and stuff. If there's anything that we're going to publish these, so if there's anything that you would like to advertise for people to join different networks and communities and stuff like that, I would also invite you to share that as well with us.
Okay.
If, there's groups out there that you feel like would be beneficial for people.
Yeah. So just letting folks know, there's the Black Music Therapy Network, which is primarily for Black identifying people in music therapy sorts of roles as students, educators, professionals. There's also the Latin American Music Therapy Association, or network. Sorry, not association, network. They're all networks, I believe. There's one for people of South Asian descent, people of different Asian backgrounds, and there's one that highlights the needs and advocates the needs for people in the disabled community. And then there's within AMTA, there's, I think, Team Rainbow. They look at advocating and supporting the folks who belong to the LGBTQIA plus community. So there are different facets within the music therapy profession and group that are creating affinity spaces for people to get in, because we're not just, white heterosexual women. We're quite a mix of people, which is good to see and to value. Anything else I want to, and I just mentioned our podcast, Black Creative Healing. It's not specific. Let me say this. It's not only for listeners who are Black. We do highlight and focus on holistic visioning of Black communities and art and creative expressions within that. But it's open to anybody interested in learning about what's happening creatively with healing in Black communities. And we have prompts and experiences that work for self-identifying Black people as well as for people who aren't. So I encourage people to, wherever you get your podcast, come check that out. Yeah, so I guess those are the things I would think of for music therapy. Sorts of related things. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, that's all the questions that we have. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Gosh. For anybody considering music therapy as a profession, I would say absolutely, absolutely do it. It will be one of the hardest things you do. That's the honest truth, because it's a lot of work, but it can be one of the most wonderful experiences, one of wonderful journeys you embark upon, because you will meet people in school, in clinical settings, in your work that you would never have imagined. You will find yourself in places you can't believe. You will do things you would never have expected yourself to do, and you will grow so much. So absolutely consider becoming a music therapist. So.
That is a great way to end. So thank you, Adenike, for joining us today and for letting us.
My pleasure. My absolute pleasure.
And it was great catching up, and hopefully we'll get to see you soon.
Yes. Thank you so much for thinking of me. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.